The true events of this strange account still remain a mystery in the small community of Clyde River on Prince Edward Island in Canada. Around 1815, a man called John Scott had built a wheat processing mill, which he went on to run with his sons. It was known to be a good mill, with a reputation for producing the best flour in the county. However, at one stage, the family fell on hard times due to an unknown illness. The debilitating condition saw John Scott, his wife and children laid up for days, while none of the doctors who had been tending to them could determine what it was. One evening, John Scott sat beside a small fire in his kitchen, trying desperately to heal his tired and aching body. He and the rest of the family were constantly feeling very chilled and feverish, and nothing seemed able to warm their bones and soothe their distress. As they had all been sick for such a long time, without any treatment available, it was beginning to feel like they would never get better. On this night, a cough from an adjoining room echoed in the silence of the night. It came from one of John's 2 children, but before he could check on them, his wife began moaning and wailing. She was lying in bed on the 2nd floor in a high fever. The entire family had become afflicted by the same illness, and fear was starting to weigh heavily on John's mind as he listened to the pain and suffering of his loved ones. He was now afraid for their future, of the unknown, in particular worried that they might not recover. He was also very concerned that they would soon run out of money if he was unable to return to work, being the sole owner and operator of Scott's mill. The situation had become dire as, thanks to this mysterious illness that had seen him weak and confined over days, large sacks of unground wheat were piling up in the mill. Suddenly, a new sound echoed inside the house. This was not the rasping of his ailing family, but a creaking noise from the mill, the sound it made as its grinding wheel began to turn. This just added to John's fears, as he now assumed that someone had broken into the mill and was exploiting its unused product. Already exhausted by his growing list of concerns, John wearily stood up and put on his coat and hat. He stepped outside into the cold, dark night, then slowly made his way down the steep hill path that led from his house to the mill. As he approached, he noticed that the lantern, which hung near the main doorway, had been lit. He cast his mind back to the last time he had checked on the mill and knew he had definitely not left the lantern lit. He assumed that whoever had broken into the building had illuminated it, and there was more evidence of the violation as he spotted a thin wisp of flour dust floating in the air, visible in the ray of light cast by the lantern. John could see that the mill door was slightly ajar as he then searched the ground and picked up a thick, heavy stick. He tightened his hands over the rough bark, now feeling extreme anger. It was a low enough act that someone had broken into his mill, but the fact that he had to physically deal with the intruder in his current state made him feel even more irritated. He and his family were desperately ill, their livelihood was in jeopardy, and now some unknown person was messing around inside his mill. The unfairness of the situation was more than he could tolerate and more than he would allow to continue. Without a moment's hesitation, John flung the door wide open and then quickly stepped into the mill. The sight he saw before him was so unexpected that he froze and relaxed his hold on the stick. The mill had not been vandalised or damaged in any way, but on the contrary, seemed in excellent shape. In addition to the perfect spectacle John saw before him, the mill was operating at peak capacity, with the wheels spinning on their axles and the hopper filled with the grain that was progressing on to be ground. The mouths of the elevators were fitted tightly with bags, sitting there ready to collect the freshly ground flour. John saw that a second light had been lit over by the millstone in the middle of the mill. While John stared, trying to make sense of it all, footsteps thudded down the creaking stairs. Within a few seconds, John could finally see who had been responsible for drawing him away from the warmth of the fire in his kitchen. But it was a man whom John did not recognise. As the unknown miller crossed the floor and in a very professional manner ran his fingers through the grain he had poured into the hopper, he did not pay John any attention. In fact, it was as though he couldn't even see John. The man's movements and activities proved that he was an experienced hopper, but this raised even more questions. Not only why was he doing John's work for him, but where had he himself come from? As an embedded local, John knew all the millers for a great distance around the Clyde River area, and this person was a complete mystery to him. John moved forward to speak to the stranger and was just about to open his mouth to ask the man who he was, but didn't get the chance. The mill door slammed shut with a horrific bang as both lanterns were snuffed out as if by an invisible breath. Before John could take in what had happened, the intruder disappeared into thin air. The machinery of the mill slowly ground to a halt, and the entire building was struck with an eerie silence. Not being a person to scare easily, John reached into his pocket and pulled out a match, then struck it and held the flame to the extinguished lantern, once again lighting the room. John then thoroughly searched the entire mill, but the man was nowhere to be found. John then became very aware that the man had not really been a man, but a ghost, and the helpful being's identity remains a mystery to this day. According to paranormal historians, other strange and unexplainable phenomena occurred around Scotts Mill during those early days, but that was the only occasion that John Scott came face to face with the ghost. His family's health was soon restored, and the bags of flour, ground by the ghost, helped them to get through a tough time. But had John not unwittingly interrupted the spirit's work, who can say how many bags he may have filled by sunrise?